satisfy you that your colleague was having an influence in the learning of a student or colleague. Now, I imagine that some of you have continued to talk, whilst I was wondering if you were going to be writing. But I did see that the group here, we're not going to individuals or pairs, right? Because the strength of the group is still very strong indeed. But would somebody please share with me now what you've been writing? Has anybody got something written down in relation to the evidence? Would you like to mind just sharing? Yeah. Good. Can you hear? Or I just wanted to see this.
How to improve his teaching statistics to the teacher teaching. And what I suggest that we should use the following evidence to explain this way or influence this teaching to the teacher. One is he should see the video tape of these students through their teaching technique. The other one is he should look at his student teacher's lesson plan for a topic on statistics. And the other one, he should select the pupils' worksheet to explain this.
Do you get that idea that your colleague wants to improve his teaching of statistics? Okay? Now, what is your name? And then I can... Supo. Supo. Yeah. So you would say to Supo, where is the evidence that you have influenced any student's learning of statistics? Now, that kind of evidence is what you would need to produce. You might, for example, decide in teaching of statistics that a lot of errors are being made in the inappropriate use of statistics. And you might help your students to understand the difference between 4 kinds of data. That most of you may know the difference between nominal, ordinal, ratio, interval data. In the UK, you can read a lot of articles using statistics which are called parametric statistics, which require interval or ratio data. But the data that is collected is actually ordinal and nominal. So if your students understood the difference between those kinds of data and then the appropriate statistic to use, that would be evidence of your influence in the learning of your students. Now, I had 4 years myself of learning statistics when I was doing my diploma, advanced diploma, and then my master's in psychology. And this was one of the big mistakes that we saw in the use of statistics. That in educational research, most of the data you gather is nominal or ordinal. You can't actually put an interval on it. If I talked about justice or fairness or love or compassion or the values that we bring into education, we need to find this kind of data which is nominal or ordinal rather than the interval or the ratio. But if you want to compare test scores across schools using parametric statistics, that gives you a really important piece of data about how different schools are doing in terms of test scores. So if your students learn the difference in that kind of data, that will be evidence of your influence in their learning. So that would be great to do that, you know, and I like very much that idea clearly with the idea of the videotape. Are there any others that you feel you can share with me? Because it's coming to understand what each one of you is trying to do. I looked through every one of the pieces of paper last night, and believe me, you have all got unique inquiries. You've all got something that you're wanting to improve, which is unique to you. So you need to pay attention to that difference between you to help each other to improve their learning. So is there anybody else who would just like to say, looking at the evidence that you would need to see to show that your colleague had influenced what it was they were wanting to improve, what would you need to see? Anybody else? Could anybody else do that? Sorry, is it Pramuan? Pramuan?
Yes.
Yes, Pramuan. That was really, again, that was very clear, focused on the evidence, and that would actually satisfy us that you really had improved the learning of statistics of your students. Is there anybody else that feels that they've got something about the evidence? You were on talk, yes, you've got to chat with. Is it on? Do you want to try this one? Yeah, I think this one's okay.
I think, yeah, you have to speak quite closely to it.
I would like to share my ideas about the number.
A bit closer.
Yes, I would like to improve my PCK for teaching science teachers. And when I discussed with my peer, Ajahn Piyapon, she's very lovely. She's my critical friend. Right. And I say that, okay, I will collect the data from my students' journal entries, from videotape, and from my observation, for example. But Piyapon suggests me that it's not enough. She said that I have to ask my students to analyze teaching practice from video and ask my students to respond and to critique the video. So I will know my students' PCK from their analysis of the video tape. So this is one strategy that I think it's very useful, and I think this is useful evidence. But the evidence that she gave me a suggestion that I have to ask myself that do students use the appropriate teaching strategy according to the content that they teach, and do students use the appropriate technique, for example. So she gave me guiding question for collecting data.
Again, do you see how good that is? That Chattery has been given an idea from a critical friend that he hadn't had before. And this is a really good idea. Now, that is how the action research process works, in a sharing of ideas. Thanks, that's really helpful. Now, one point I would just add to that if you were to be helping Chattery to improve the nature of his influence, we say educational influence. So at the moment, Chattery is very influenced by an idea that I think came out of Lee Shulman's work on pedagogical content knowledge. Now, when I was doing my master's in psychology, my tutors were very influenced by the work of Piaget. And so they made sure that I understood Piaget's theories. And they encouraged me in my research to use Piaget's theories. Now, it took me some time to realize that what I was doing was testing Piaget's theories, and not focusing on what I was interested in was the development of scientific understanding of my pupils in my classroom. And I had to come out of my Piagetian cognitive stage theory to ask those kind of questions, looking at videotapes of my practice with my students, to really ask, am I helping them to develop their scientific understanding? Which was actually different to my use of Piaget's cognitive stage theory. So it might be that Chattery in relation to pedagogical content knowledge, think of that idea, pedagogical content knowledge, might need to focus with students on the nature of their learning of the subject. That if, for example, you want your students to understand scientific concepts, you'll need at some point to ask, is Shattery showing that his students' scientific understanding is improving? Now that is different from him showing his pedagogical content knowledge. The idea of pedagogical content knowledge is a concept coming from someone else's theory. It can be useful, but you will need, I think, to question Shattery about his influence in his students' learning of the subject which he's teaching. Okay? Now, this is where critical friends can, I think, be very helpful in moving your inquiry forward. Is there anybody else who feels they would just share just some of the evidence before we have our first break? Because this issue of you helping each other to improve the nature of your inquiry is central to action research. So would anybody just like to just say a little? Do you want to just get the...
Let's just...
just see if that's working.
See if that one is working.
Good morning.
Is it? Yep.
I talked with Dr. Subit. He teaches astrology in astronomy in the undergraduate student, and he would like to improve how to use instructional media in his class to teach moon phenomena for the student, because he found that student has a lot of misconception about the moon phenomena. And I suggest that he should collect the evidence in two parts. One part is about student misconception. The evidence that his instructional media work is a student misconception on moon phenomena decrease. So it will collect this evidence by conceptual tests. The second, student can explain phenomena in class correctly when the teacher random student to explain. So this evidence will be collected with the classroom observation and student interview.
Excellent. That, again, do you see how powerful and clear that response was to the evidence that you would need to show in relation to the pupils' misconceptions of science, and how your instructional video might help them to overcome those misconceptions? Now, nobody else in this room had got that as a concern. I went through all of your papers, and yours was the only one that really was interested in helping pupils to overcome misconceptions in science, in particular, you know, the movement of the moon and the lunar activity. So that is a very exciting individual action research project. And in the UK, in the, I think it was the 1990s, we had a very influential professor of science education at Leeds University called Professor Rosalind Driver. I'll give her your name. And if you Google Rosalind Driver, you could see that a lot of her research was on helping pupils to overcome misconceptions in science. And she has some examples of the pupils', if you like, misconceptions in relation to the movement of the moon. Now, you could integrate Rosalind Driver's insights into your own account to show how significant your research is, not only within your university or school with teaching, but globally. Because this is a problem that I've met in the United States, I've met in Europe, and now you're focusing in on it with an instructional video that could help overcome misconceptions. So that is why that action research account, unique to you, but it could have influence way beyond the shores of Thailand. So Anybody else before we have our break? Because we're ready just for our first break.
What's the name of the researcher?
It is called, she's called Rosalind Driver. Unfortunately, she died of cancer some years ago, but her science project was very well known in the UK. And Rosalind, and it's D-R-I-V-E-R. D-R-I-V-E-R. And a lot of her research focused on pupils' misconception of scientific concepts. Now, when we come back, I want again to balance what I bring into the room from other people, like the 11-year-olds from Croatia, showing the teacher and the pedagogue the evidence that they've influenced action research. So I want to just keep this balance going between you continuing with your action research processes, because I want to emphasize how important it is for you to tell each other's stories. Now, these, first of all, are what we call anecdotes. They are just stories of what you've already been doing to improve the learning and the practice in your context. And what I want to be able to do is to focus on some of those stories and show how they can be transformed into rigorous knowledge creation. But starting with the stories that you can tell each other about what it is that you've already been doing. This is very important, because in this room there is an amazing depth and extent of what we call embodied knowledge. The knowledge of educators of what it is that they are doing with their students. Okay, but I'll start when we come back from our break, just by asking, is there anything else you wish me to take out, having thought about it, probably from yesterday, or from your conversations, that you're feeling you're still confused about, or you want me to deal with in more detail? Okay, so if we have, I think it's about a 15-minute break, isn't it, Professor? Yeah, okay, that's fine. And I think the drinks are outside here. Okay, if we get underway again, okay? Yeah. As usual, I just like to open the session just by asking if there's anything that you feel you'd like to raise with me. I know it is sometimes difficult to speak up in front of a large group, but I do like to give people just that opportunity to say they've got ideas, questions, or anything that they want to clarify. So is there anything that you're feeling you would like to raise from the previous session or from yesterday? It makes me think that everything is being very clear for you. Is that true? Yes. But don't hesitate, because I know when a session finished, several people have come up and they clearly didn't want to speak in front of the whole group, but individually they will actually talk about things that are really important. So do please come up to me and ask when a session finishes, or just before we're beginning again, just to talk over if something is interesting you or you want me to develop it. What I'd like to focus on at the moment is something that did come up in the last session, and it was to do with the uniqueness of the inquiry into the astrology. So that was a fascinating paper that I saw yesterday and the evening when I was reading them all. And then in our conversation, it struck me that Professor Rosalind Driver had done a lot of work in England on this idea that the pupils, they really don't have misconceptions. They actually understand, for example, astrology, the way the moon or the sun or natural phenomena work from the ground of their own experience. And I've just Googled Rosalind Driver because we had, Pramuan was saying that he's got Professor Rosalind Driver's book, one of them on the making sense, wasn't it? And it's that making meaning in relation to science education. So I just Googled Rosalind Driver, and this is what has come up. Because action research is a really scholarly form of inquiry, which draws insights from traditional theories into the creation of a living theory. So it is important to recognize that just as, for example, Chatterjee was using Lee Shulman's notion of the pedagogical content knowledge as an idea, that can be brought into the creation of Chatterjee's living theory as he explains his educational influence in the learning of science with his students. And it's the same when we were just talking about Rosalind Driver's work. Because Rosalind Driver had this idea, you can see it here, that she argued that children's learning was dependent upon existing ideas about a phenomenon rather than being limited by a child's developmental stage. Now, Rosalind's ideas questioned Piagetian psychology in relation to developmental stages. Because as a science teacher, I was influenced by the Piagetian cognitive stage theory. But if you take Piaget in terms of the notion of limitations of a particular stage, which could be age-related, it could limit what it was you were expecting from the students. And Rosalind Driver's work questioned that and actually opened up possibilities for children's learning in science that went beyond a limitation of stage theory. Now, if you draw that into your living theory to show that you've understood both the stage theory and then the questioning of that by Rosalind Driver and how this is related to your own inquiry, this shows how you are integrating scholarly work within your own living theory. And every doctorate I put on the web has got to demonstrate a really critical and creative engagement with the ideas of others which are appropriate for a doctorate. So that is one way in which you can actually draw ideas into your living theory from the scholarly work of others. But as I say, that one of Rosalind Driver, and I know others in the room and students have actually engaged with some of Rosalind Driver's ideas in relation to science and inquiry. Now, you can all just search that. All I did was Google Professor Rosalind Driver. And I then Googled this, and it just said that Making Sense of Secondary Science, this was the paperback, which was available on Amazon. So I just searched that, and you can do the same and find this background. Some of you have already got the text, and others might enjoy accessing it. But this is where the internet is so powerful in sharing ideas immediately. You can say something to me, I can Google it, I can find it, you can then actually draw insights from it. Now, I'm curious about this movement forward from evidence that you were working on before you had a break. And I just want to check, is there anybody else now that in terms of your partner, as we were talking about what kind of evidence would you need to see that would convince you of their influence? Has anybody else got any more evidence that they would need to see? We had a look at the astrology, we've had a look at that idea of the pedagogical content knowledge, and question the need to, in one way, go beyond the idea of pedagogical content knowledge to focus on the learning of the students in relation to science, as well as the pedagogical content knowledge. Has anybody else got a different area? And I know there are lots in the room. I know there are a lot of different areas. For example, there's the computer science area. There are so many areas of inquiry in this room that somebody has actually said, I need to see evidence of this to actually justify your claim that you're influencing the learning of a student. Now, has anybody else got any more evidence that they would need to see that they could share with us? Yes? Yeah, good. We might just check the microphone. You might have to get close to it.
Okay. My role is critical friends of Ajahn Kassim from Pakistan University. He would like to improve method of teaching mathematics. And what the way to improve method of teaching mathematics, he would like to assign his students working in groups and look at the mathematics textbooks from many countries, for example, like Singapore and Japan, in order to elaborate student ideas of how to solve mathematical problems, because in Thailand we are quite familiar with first the teachers will show the rule and then the student just follow the teachers. For the data collecting, we will collect the lesson plan that student design in each period and videotaping of the teaching practice of each student.
Again, thank you for sharing that really important area about the learning of mathematics. Now, if you help each other to improve your inquiry, what I'm hoping that you would be asking to see is evidence from the pupils that they were solving mathematical problems. That what I think you wanted to do was to improve the pupils' ability to solve mathematical problems. We would need to see evidence from the pupils themselves that they were actively solving those problems. And the evidence we might need to see could be video, it could be interview, it could be observation, it could be something we often use, which is evidence from the pupils' books themselves. We Xerox the books, we show the thinking that is going on as a pupil solves a mathematical problem. But this is exactly the kind of evidence that I think you would all need to see to show that you are having the influence that you wanted to have. But it would have to be as precise as that. You would have to be able to show, and you could do this pretty quickly, I think, literally within a week or two of working with some students. You'll be able to show whether they were actually solving the problems, they were working on the problems in a mathematical way, and you were helping the development of mathematical understanding in your students. I have one or two papers, narratives from teachers who have also worked on trying to improve mathematical understanding, and I will try to show you how to access those later. Is there anything else that you think, well, that was really good, very, very clear indeed? Yeah?
Just one comment. I did it in physics problem solving.
Okay.
There is the things I have experience on improving physics and problem solving to my students by using the so-called strategy things around. So I tell the student while they are thinking, but I encourage them to think aloud, not to think quietly. This could be one of the evidence.
Yeah, it could. And again, that is actually a different area. So you've got in the room, we've already had chemistry, we've had the mathematics, we've had the physics in terms of enabling the students to think aloud of their problem solving, and that is a really good way to get on the inside of their thinking. But you need to show this evidence in your own living theory as you explain your influence. So we've already had also the astrology, we've had the pedagogical content knowledge. Is there anything else that you're feeling we haven't covered at the moment in terms of individual interests and inquiries that you're working on, that you want to improve your practice? Because the more you can become familiar with the different people in the room and what they are doing, the more you'll be able to actually help each other by asking, have you managed to produce your account, we say your explanation, your research report, to show that you're having this influence? Now, is there anybody else that is actually has got some evidence? That question about the evidence, is there anybody else who would like to share? Please, yes. You might have to speak closer to the microphone. You want to try it or try this? Oh, this one's working.
This is okay, as long as it's close.
Professor. Good morning, everybody. And first of all, I'd like to introduce myself and my team. We are from Kimaku's Institute of Technology, Latvia, and Dr. Tomas is the head of the Department of Industrial Education. And today, I would like to convey the message to tell you what is his area of concern that he wants to improve at our university. The area of his expertise is in the information technology education. And actually, my expertise is in English, actually, and I have an interest in this kind of area, so that I come here also. I want to learn something new. The area of his concern is the information technology. He found that one of the problems when he teaches in his class is that the teacher students that he teaches cannot teach their own students with the learner-centered approach. They stick to just only the teacher-centered approach. So he has an idea that he wants to make the teacher students to be able to conduct the learner-centered classroom. So he used the team. His idea is that he will use the team-based learning. Team-based learning, right? Team-based learning for the students to be able to share their own knowledge in group. So his evidence that he told me is he will use the pre-test of the knowledge in information technology, and the score that the students will be shown in his report, and then he will display his lesson plans in each week, and the worksheets of each activities, and the reflections of the students in each activities, and then after all 8 weeks of the experiment, he will administer the post-test of the students again, and then the scores will come out, and that will be displayed in the tables, which can show the good progression of each student. And he will also the videotape in each period of the experiment. He will videotape the activities and all of the dynamics of the group and of the classroom, and then the interview. But this part, I suggest him to have the interview in terms of the, it's like the mental cognition, whether they are aware of their learnings or not, so that we will use the qualitative data at this point to into the next research. Just like that, I suggest.
Okay.
Yes.
Which university is that?
Kimaku's Institute of Technology, Latvia.
Yeah.
And so we are from the Faculty of Industrial Education.
Okay, thank you, because you brought a new field into the conversation.
Yes.
And again, this is a very significant development around the world in terms of information, we say communications technology. So we usually use that ICT. And I'll just show you how, in relation to that kind of evidence, you do the pre-test, you do the post-test, you've got some video data, you've got the interviews with the students. Now, one of the things about moving from the transmission mode of teaching to a learner-centered classroom is to do with the evidence that you can produce from the learners, like in Croatia, where the pupils were providing the evidence of their learning to the pedagogue and the teacher. And I'll just show you where you can access from the Dublin Centre, the Dublin City University Centre for Digital Learning, the kind of work that they've been undertaking to bring the learner-centered work in ICT into the teacher's classroom. I'll show you how you can access that, and then you might be able to draw on that. But that was a lovely illustration of the kind of research which you could undertake, strengthening the evidence and building up a living theory of the influence that you're having as you move to the learner-centered classroom. So thank you for that. That was really very clear. And as you're working together at the university, you could continue to provide that critical friend dialogue which would help with the development of the research report. But let me just show you how you could all access this. And this is, as I say, I think this is work at the forefront of information and communication technology. And you've seen me, you've heard me draw to your attention the work of, thank you, the work of Margaret Farron and Yvonne Grotti. Both have got their doctorates, their living theory doctorates, and they are the co-directors of the Centre for E-Innovation, Pedagogy and Digital Workplace Learning at Dublin City University. And if you go to my webpage, bottom of the left-hand menu, into the other home pages section, and you can access both the Centre here of Innovation and also Margaret Farron's homepage. Now Margaret, under the research, has got a whole series of students' work that talks about improving the use of ICT, action, research and professional development. These are the research presentations. There are also a whole lot of the students' masters dissertations that you can access. Like here, the MSc dissertations, also e-portfolios, which would give you a tremendous amount of evidence from the students in building up their e-portfolio of the evidence that they're actually learning about the ICT, and they're changing the classrooms into learner-centered classrooms. But as I say, this is where you can go into any of these and access. It says web-based artifacts, research inquiries by participants in the MSc Education and Training Management in e-learning. Improving student learning through use of an online learning environment. You've got WebQuest is a particular form of e-learning. The use of ICT, again, it's for business studies students. The use of the possibilities of simulation games in ICT in a primary classroom. And you can access the whole of these dissertations from the students from that website. That is Margaret Farron's website. I'll just go through it again so you know. You can go into my website, actionresearch.net, down to the other home pages. You can actually, from that home page, access Margaret Farron's, Yvonne Grotti's, and the work within the centre. Now, I've shown you this a few times just to make sure that you can actually access these. Yvonne Grotti's, again, that is an interesting website. That includes her 2012 doctorate, which shows her producing these kinds of classrooms with the students actively engaged in the use of the new technology. But that will load in a moment. And you can then access a lot of Yvonne's work from these. First of all, you can get her PhD, all the work on creativity, on multimedia resources. You can access the research. And this is very important to be going to a supervision group of 2012, because this 2012 group show a range of master's students, and you can access all of the dissertations by clicking. When this image comes up, you can click on this image, the list of her students' work comes up, and you can click on each student name and get the whole of the dissertation, which will give you the evidence of your influence in enhancing ICT in the classroom. But I think of all the innovations at the moment, the one that is most significant in relation to learning is the increased use of ICT, information and communication technology, within the classrooms, including the science classrooms. And we have got some master's students who've done that from the science and the maths and other subject areas. So that is a very exciting project which will take some time to develop. And don't worry about it taking months. Remember, some of this work has taken years to get to this point that can be shared internationally in conferences to demonstrate the quality of the work. Okay, but that again, a new area, bring it into the group so you can see that at that institute, this work is going on, and you can ask each other, if you get together, what it is that has been done since now, since you heard about it, and into the future as people are developing. Is there anything else that you're feeling in terms of evidence that you would like to bring to our attention? Because we have yet to hear from you about something going on in your university. Anything else, or have we covered anything? Yes, please. Just check. See if that is working.
Yes, it's
Yep.
working.
Yep, good.
As we talk about, as we discuss about the evidence, we come up with some question, and I would like to ask you about the evidence. How do we know that the evidence that we collect come from our educational inference, not something else? Come from, for example, instructional media that we use beside student tutoring from outside classroom. Because in scientific research we have the control group, but this action research we might not have control group to compare.
Yeah. And again, that was a really important question which came out of my own research in 1971 and 1972 when I was doing my master's degree in psychology, and I used a controlled experimental design. As a head of science, I could put the pupils into randomly allocated groups. So I had 3 randomly allocated groups. I could actually design my tests to find the influence on the dependent variable of independent variables, and used a statistical analysis of covariance to actually determine a correlation between, yes, what was going on in the classroom with the teacher and inquiry learning. Now, it took me some time to recognize that I could not control for the teacher variable, that I was using a controlled experimental design because my first degree was a joint honours in physics and chemistry. And I was used to carrying out, and I did some research after the first degree into electrochemistry, and I was using controlled experimental designs, where I could actually control in relation to the dependent and the independent variable. When I tried the same methods in a classroom in my department, it took me some time to understand that I couldn't actually control for the teacher variable. Even though I was allocating pupils randomly to groups, there was no way I could actually control, because it's like putting you all randomly into different groups and thinking that I've got control groups. And it's nonsense, because you're all unique, you're all totally different. So that is where I started to question the validity of what my tutors were telling me about controlled experimental designs. And I was very persuaded, as I did my first degree in physical science, it actually worked there. It works in agriculture. You know, if you want to improve the yield of a potato field with fertilizer, controlled experimental designs are really good. If you want to test a drug in the pharmaceutical industry, it's important to carry out controlled experimental design. If it now comes to what we are doing together educationally, I'm saying you need a totally different approach. Because if it comes about that something that I actually worked on with you captivates your imagination. Supposing Chattery likes what I was saying about living theory, and he's already demonstrated his scholarship with self-study and critical theory. Supposing in a few months you see that Chattery is actually publishing something, developing something, with ideas which, if you like, could only have come out of this session in terms of influence. The idea of a living theory. So I think that if I claim in a few months that I've actually influenced Chattery's learning, it will be very different, I think, for you to challenge that. Do you see, if at the moment somebody else in this room, who I've never heard of living theory, is captivated, their imaginations are captivated by something I am offering you, and then you actually demonstrate your use of that idea in your own inquiry, I think that I will have very good evidence to say that I have influenced your learning in relation to this idea. And it's the same with you in the classrooms. That if you go into, for example, with that mathematical understanding, and you have the intention to actually help your pupils to improve their mathematical problem solving, and over a few weeks or a few months, you can be shown the evidence of the conversations, the dialogues, and work with the pupils as you respond to particular pupils, it begins really, we say it goes beyond reasonable doubt. This is like our jury system. The barristers have got to demonstrate to a jury beyond reasonable doubt that the case they're making is legitimate. If you came with that evidence that you had worked on problem solving in mathematics with this group of students over time, you show yourselves responding to the particular pupils, and in that way you can show their learning, it becomes beyond reasonable doubt that you have influenced that learning. It's not a causal relationship. This is very important. Like a controlled experimental design tries to get at causal relationships. If I do this, then that will happen. The educational relationships in this room are different to that. Because no matter what I do with you, I cannot have a causal relationship with you. Because your creativity and imagination has to, we call, mediate between what I do and what you learn. But I can find my influence with you if over time you can be shown to be integrating some of the ideas that I brought to you today and for a week, and then we might have some conversations over the next 3 months through email, and you can see the validity of some of the things I've been saying, and you bring these into your account. That then gives me evidence of my educational influence with you. Are you okay with this? Because this was a very, very important question about the methods, because most of you, like myself, I think, might have been taught that scientific knowledge is probably of the kind that's the most superior knowledge, using a controlled experimental design. And that's how I was taught. Within my university course, my first degree, part of my second degree was that. My third degree is the doctorate. I'd actually demonstrated that I had to find a different methodology. And this is what all of you can actually do educationally. You can actually show you need to develop your own methodologies to demonstrate your educational influence with your students in your context. So thank you for that, again, a really crucial question. Any others that you're feeling, yes, you want to actually explore with me, or there's more evidence that you want in terms of your own inquiries? Nothing more? Are you sure? Okay, let me just mention this one. Because, you know, my pronunciations in Thai are not very good. But Caroline, yes, and Shalita. Now, working IPST. Now, I know this is quite difficult because Shalita will actually talk individually with you very clearly. But I also know that it is difficult to stand up in front of the whole group and actually say what is interesting. But once you were having a drink, I was having a talk with both of them about the conversation they were having. And it was Parawi that was saying, in the conversation, and Shalita also said that Parawi had actually responded to what she was saying in a way that helped her to clarify something that she was actually working on. In the conversation, something was actually emerging which was important to both of them. You often take for granted the importance of the conversations you're having. In living theory, you need to actually bring to the forefront, you need to show how important those kinds of educational conversations are. They need to come into your account, we say living theories. Because conversation and the learning through conversation is often the most educational experience that you and students can have. And this is why I'm very powerfully attracted to your resistance to me putting you into individual groups. And still, even this morning, there was a comfort that a group of 6 were finding in just working together. Now, I think you take for granted how important that is. I'm suggesting that there will come a time when you will start to research that as being very important in terms of your inquiries and your educational research. Because there is a power in your communications together, relationally, that we need to recognize and see as of value. Okay, so I'll bring that into what I do again tomorrow, because you have already established something which other people in different parts of the world have got to work very hard at establishing. You've already got an ability to work together collectively, come into community, to actually feel a relationship, a valuing of trust, but that one of valuing the other person is something I'm noticing in this room, which needs to come into, in my judgment, your research, because you could bring these qualities in your living theories and share them with the rest of the world, who has got a lot to learn about how to create trusting communities, how to create communities where individuals are actually helping each other to learn and improve their learning. Now I'll try and show you how, with the video and the workshop over the next few days, you might actually bring those qualities into your living theories. Now what I would like you to do now, it's something that I'm going to develop further in the afternoon. And it's something that you may not have done before. But I think you saw it in that paper from Croatia with Branko Bogner and Marika Zovko, where, as part of their living theories, they talked about their personal values, the connection with their professional values. Because in the Western academies, for years, we've been taught to separate them. I was taught in my psychology master's degree to take my eye out of the question. I was taught that I must use a controlled experimental design. I had to eliminate subjectivity, that the ideal was actually spurious, it was a false kind of objectivity, as if I could exist independently to the social context in which I was living and working. Now, this isn't easy for people like myself who were trained for years in terms of the traditional scientific method. And I don't want to suggest this is easy. It took me months to move from being a positivist scientist, committed completely to controlled experimental designs, to a decision that the philosopher called Michael Polanyi, in a very famous book in 1958 called Personal Knowledge, said that we need to make a decision, and this decision is at the heart of personal knowledge. It took me months to actually understand the significance of this decision. He said, take a decision to understand the world from your point of view. As a person, claiming originality and exercising your judgment responsibly with universal intent. Now that decision, it took 3 months of quite traumatic experiences for me to move from being a positivist scientist, believing in controlled experimental design, to really believing that I, as an individual, not the egotistical I, but the I of communication, the I of relationship with others, could produce a valid explanation of my influence with my learners in the classroom. So I don't want to pretend that this kind of transformation is easy. As I say, it took me, I can still remember the 3 months of quite traumatic experience of beginning to see that my traditional way of knowing, the thinking that I knew something, was not appropriate to my educational research in the classrooms with the children. if I put my own eye in the question, how do I improve, how do I make this better, I need to reflect on who I am. I need to understand why I am so passionate about inquiry learning. I need to understand why I want democratic forms of evaluation in my classroom with a passion for social justice. Now, those passions often come out of early experiences, sometimes in families, sometimes in quite difficult circumstances. A lot of my students explain that they've actually been bullied. They felt bullied in primary school and secondary school. And this is difficult because it was sometimes by the teachers and they did not feel listened to. So they explain why they are so interested in developing that learner-centered classroom, because they experienced a transmission mode for much of their life in school. And they were not taken seriously as learners. Now, what I would like you to do, as we were doing before, it's not now to focus on evidence. I will come back to the action reflection planner that we've been going through. I'll come back to that later. But I want to do something I'm going to focus on again this afternoon, which is you telling the stories, just you, and we could sometimes call those anecdotes, those stories about your history, which will help your partner to understand why you are doing what you are doing. Now, I'll just give you one or two examples of what I've got in mind. I've got a dissertation on the web. It's by Christine Jones. I'll show you how to access it. Christine works with the children with special educational needs. She's a senior manager and she manages quite a large workforce around Bath. And she's called Chris Jones. How do I improve my practice as an inclusion officer working in a children's service? Now, inclusion is a special term in England, which means that you try to bring everyone within a school system. You don't, if you can possibly avoid it, exclude people. You try to bring them into the values of your organisation and make them feel literally valued as a human being. Now, this is what Chris Jones did, and this was the very first dissertation to be accepted at Bath Spa University using multimedia. Now, you can access that, and this is what Chris set out. And I'll just show you how you can integrate. There's a normal introduction, normal chapters with methodology, narrative, but it's here where all of these refer to video clips of particularly significant experiences that help the examiners and the readers to understand Chris's motives for doing what she does. And this first one here, if you access that here, Chris speaking to colleagues about a childhood memory. And you'll see this video clip where Chris is describing what happened to her in primary school, where she was sitting on a chair and actually didn't know that she was rubbing one of the posters on the wall with her head. Yep, she didn't realise that's what she was doing until the teacher came to her and spoke to her in a very angry way. And it was always shouting at Chris in terms of what she was doing. And Chris was so startled and so distressed by that way of communicating to her that she says, at that moment, I decided to become a teacher so that I didn't behave in this way to the pupils in my class, that I would talk with them in a very different way. Because all that teacher needed to do was gently explain to me that I was actually doing something which I didn't know I was doing, and I would have immediately stopped and apologised and tried to put it right. Now, this is how Chris has actually explained why she is so passionate about giving the children the space for their own voices to be heard. Now, I think everybody in this room will have a story which helps your critical friend to understand something about why you are doing what you are doing, why you are so passionate about it. Am I making sense there? Do I communicate what I would now like you to do? Because I now want you to talk to your, again, it's a partner that you're actually using as you were there as your critical friend, but try now just to communicate through a story some experience that you've had that you recognize as being significant to you in relation to your educational experience, and then we can actually develop this, as I say this afternoon, as we develop the stories into valid research. But I want you to start with that experience, coming with an authentic story from your own experience. Don't worry about the notion of scholarship. It's just to go back now into your experience and talk about that with your critical friend. And after about 5 minutes, I'll just ask you to switch over. Okay? I'd like you to